Well, hello and welcome to In the Growth Space. I'm David McGlennon. I'm so glad that you're with me here today. And I'm really excited about this particular episode. You know, I love all of my guests and I love all of my episodes. This one has such a special connection for me. Some of you may know that in my younger years, I was a pilot, still am a pilot technically, I just haven't flown for a while. I was a flight instructor and I absolutely love aviation. Matter of fact, some of you might see a little statue here in my office that I bought for myself when I passed my check ride for my flight instructor certification. And I am so excited about this particular episode because we have today on the episode Robert Cujo Teschner. Cujo is his call sign, and we didn't really get into how he got his call sign. He shared that with me off air, and I love the story. He can't share all of the details, but he shares enough to be able to let you in on the kind of the inside scoop. But anyway. Cujo is a combat veteran. He's not only a combat veteran, but he is a former F-15 Eagle instructor, and he was at the prestigious U.S. Air Force Weapons School. Basically, it's the Air Force Top Gun program. He's also a former F-22 Raptor fighter squadron commander, and he commanded one of America's precious few operational F-22 fighter squadrons. He holds advanced degrees in operational art and science and national security strategy, and has extensive experience in tactical planning and execution and organizational leadership. From 2004 to 2006, he served as the U.S. Air Force's expert in post-mission debriefing, the methodology used by high-performing military teams to self-correct and improve continuously. Cujo retired immediately after pinning on full colonel due to complications from cancer-related care and started an international business consulting practice based in St. Louis, Missouri. His company is called VMax Group, and their mission is to teach, inspire, and nurture teams on how to really team and making work more fulfilling and making teams much more effective. He has a book called Debrief to Win, and this is what we're talking about today. We're talking about the art and the science of debriefing and how that impacts and gives a competitive advantage to business owners, business leaders, and teams anywhere. And I'm so excited to have Cujo here because I heard him through one of my colleagues in Vistage. Vistage Chair had a video of his presentation, and I just couldn't wait to get him on the show. So if you can't tell, I'm super excited for this conversation. So let's get on with this conversation with Cujo Teschner. Well, hey, Cujo, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to In the Growth Space, man. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this. What a great opportunity it is to connect on stuff we both care about. And so let's get into it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I have to say, before we get into the good stuff from a leadership perspective and a culture perspective, I got to ask you a little bit about what got you into flying and maybe even just wanting to be a fighter pilot.
Yeah, okay, good. We'll go back down memory lane just a little bit. 1977. 4-year-old me goes to see Star Wars. This Luke Skywalker guy really impresses me. That's the guy that I want to be, and that sets a hook for me. Add to the fact my father was in the Air Force. He was a intel officer in Vietnam, and then came back and went to law school and became a judge advocate general. So I was in the in the Air Force world all my life. As a little kid, I was
Yeah.
on Air Force bases. I got to go see Dad go to work. I really liked the family atmosphere of it all. I really felt like the Air Force was our family,
Mm.
much more so than any of my formal family, because we were always around Air Force folks. And
Yeah.
whenever he chose to retire, man, he just felt like we were cutting our family away. And I told him,
Mm. Yeah,
it's
I'll
like
bet.
I gotta go join now,
I love
And
that.
between Star Wars and Dad's retirement, a little movie about the B Team came out in 1986, and yeah, I saw it.
Yeah.
I saw it at Spangdahlem Air Base with a bunch of Air Force fighter pilots who, at the end of the movie, at the base movie theater, all just got up and roared.
Roared,
And
I'll
I'm
bet.
like, okay, that's
Yeah,
it. If there's ever any doubt, there's no
that's
doubt.
it.
And I wanted to
Oh,
do that. Mhm.
I love that. I love that. Well, I will tell you that one of my loves is flying. I haven't flown in a little while, but the very first date that I took my now wife on was to go see Top Gun. And so if she could sit through that, I figured, she's worth marrying. And 35 years later, here we are. So, so I'm with you, man.
Outstanding.
Yeah,
Very, very good. What a great movie.
oh yeah,
And I throw in the little jab. I tip my hat to the Navy. I mean, they did a great job on both Top Gun movies,
they did.
supporting the production team. And I think in the second one, the Navy did an exceptional job of trying to get as many F-18 pilots into that thing to be able to say that they had been part of that,
Yes.
which is iconic
Yeah.
now, and that's how we identify
Yeah.
fighter aviation. So nice,
Right.
nicely done.
Right. I love that. Well, and you were both an F-15 pilot and the F-22 pilot, if I'm recalling. And the F-22, man, that's a freaking rocket ship. I mean, one pilot, right? I mean, it's no backseat guy. And
That's right.
I mean, you got to tell me a little bit about like your experience just having fun with the Raptor.
Yeah, okay. So I will confess that having flown both, I'll always have my heart with the Eagle. Okay.
Okay.
I spent
Okay. Sure.
most of my flying days with the
I got
Eagle.
you.
And it's, as a fellow aviator, you appreciate, I mean, the F-15, it talks to you, okay? It
Sure.
tells you when
Sure.
you're at the ragged edge. It tells you when
Right.
maybe don't push it any further than that. And you become one with the machine.
Hmm.
Whereas Raptor, it's kind of in charge. It's going to do what it wants to do. You might have a suggestion. It's going to go, yeah, no, we're going to do that. And so it's a different kind of thing. But that said, the way that you described it is 100% accurate. It is a rocket ship. I remember I spent my entire career taking off in full afterburner in the F-15. Right, it's nothing to write home about. It's just
Yeah.
another day at the office. Plug in the
Right.
afterburner, get fired up, and go. Fifty
Yeah.
thousand pounds of thrust coming out the back end of the thing.
Nice.
I read
Oh man.
somewhere that's the equivalent of the entire starting lineup of the Indianapolis 500. So that's what you're used to. That's what you're used to doing in the
Yeah.
F-15. So then you do your first afterburner takeoff at sea level in the F-22, and you're like, nothing exciting here. Plug it. Next thing you know is you're almost overspeeding the gear on takeoff. Next thing that you know, you're pulling back on the stick to try to slow down, and you're not. So now you're having to bring the throttles back while you're going straight up, so that you're not going supersonic while you're going. It's
Oh
such
my
a
gosh. I
it
can't
is
even
such
imagine.
an extreme. So I say rocket ship is exactly the right way of describing it. It's a
Man.
miracle of engineering. It is
Yeah.
like magic, and to be able to be part of that, to be able to hang with that program
Mm.
for even a short period of time. I had 3 years, and it was
That's
such an
amazing,
honor,
man.
such a gift, such a
Wow.
joy. Like I'm still
Wow.
riding the high from that, and I
I
last
bet.
flew it in 2012. So
Wow.
it's a good one. Yeah, it's a really good one.
Yeah, I can imagine it's something that just stays with you. I think that anybody who's flown any kind of aircraft, it gets in your blood. It really does. And I can't even imagine the
Yeah.
kinds of maneuvers and things that you've done with those kinds of aircraft. But man, it's amazing.
Well, so not only is there something about, as we say, slipping the surly bonds, but then there's something about being engaged in air-to-air combat, and
Yeah,
you're
sure.
out there, you're flying to get into a position to take out your opponent, and you're always looking for a competitive advantage. You're always looking for a competitive
Right.
advantage. F-15, magnificent machine, wonderful
Mm.
thing, lots lots of competitive advantage over there. F-22 even more so,
Sure.
and you could do things that you could only conceive of in the F-15 world, and
15.
that was what
Wow.
made it. I would say every opportunity to go take off on one of those things was a gift. That's
I can
probably the best way
imagine.
of describing it. Just an absolute gift. And you know
Yeah.
while you're in the program that at some point you're going to be out of the program, so you savor
Sure.
everything that you do in that program. Yeah.
I would imagine. I would imagine. Well, talking about competitive advantage, I think that's one of the things that I wanted to be able to talk with you about today because when it comes to competitive advantage in business, I mean, one of the things that you talk about in your book, Debrief to Win, is the debrief process and how much of a competitive advantage that is. And, I often will talk with business leaders about having a high performance culture as a competitive advantage, but you don't get a high performance culture without the debrief. So I'd love to hear from you. Talk a little bit about like, what is the debrief? I think that a lot of people think they know what that is, but in your world, it's maybe a little bit different. So I'd love for you to share about that.
Yeah, good. So let's talk about our world. So in fighter aviation, you're dealing with extreme disruption. You're always trying to find that small little gap you could potentially exploit in order to get into a favorable position to be able to win
Hmm.
the engagement.
Yeah.
And we're talking like very small nuances, very tiny little bits that, if used the right way, can lead to a favorable outcome in a
Yeah.
life or death scenario. So we're always looking for how can we learn from today's experience to make the next one go better. We know that
Mm.
there's only a finite number of machines available, a number of flight hours available with which to learn. So we max perform our learning after every mission.
Mm.
And and I think I used to take a lot of this for granted, the fact that our missions mattered, the fact that we had an embedded sense of purpose tied to each mission. Like we didn't just go do missions for mission's sake. We went out
Sure.
there to do missions to train so that we were ready to win,
Mm.
which meant that each mission was worth planning for, and
Sure.
each mission was certainly worth learning from. And I say that because this is so fundamental to our understanding of the debrief, and it's something that I think is largely absent in business. I think we're so overwhelmed with task work that we've lost the, hey, what's the point? People aren't
Right.
connected to what they're doing. They're just pumping out task work, pumping out task work, pumping out task
Yeah.
work. And in a task work orientation, like what's the point of trying to learn? I just have
Yeah.
more task work coming and I'm just going to move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And, the amount of overwhelm, the amount of self-limiting beliefs that say I don't have time to devote to learning is probably justified, actually. Okay. Anyway, go back to the flying world. We don't just
Yeah.
fly missions just for the sake of flying a mission. We have a purpose. There's a consequence. We know that the consequence is a pretty big deal, so we're going to prepare to win. And then on the backside of the mission, we're going to learn from the mission in order
Mm.
to make the next one go better. And we're in a constant learning posture, both in a training
Mm-hmm.
environment as well as in combat.
Mm.
In training, we're learning to make ourselves as tough as we can be. In combat, we're learning to defeat an enemy that's also learning from us.
Yeah. Sure.
So we're trying to learn faster than they are.
Mm-hmm.
What's our mechanism for learning? We call it a debrief.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
And it's a different outlook towards accountability. It's much more sophisticated because it's designed to help a team to not only verify whether we did what we set out to do. So there's an
Mm-hmm.
element here of like, did I fulfill my responsibilities? But then in all cases, regardless of whether we did or didn't fulfill those responsibilities, learn how to do it better next time.
Yeah.
So it's a
Yeah.
team learning mechanism that's so perfect for that environment. And if I'm pointing over here at like the past,
Yeah.
the fighter space, but also for this our environment, it's the perfect
Yeah.
tool for
Mm.
anybody that seeks a competitive advantage, the business that they're in. And I cannot think of a single business that doesn't need a competitive
Yeah. For
advantage.
sure.
It's there to help us to learn how to do our jobs better. And that it stunned me when I began my journey teaching this, how few organizations ever took the time to learn from their wins. And when it came to failure, how inclined we were to criticize, to blame, and if the blaming took place in public, shame somebody into trying to do better, and not
That
really
never
embrace
works.
this as a means of coaching and mentoring our teammates to have a better day tomorrow. Like the
Yeah.
blame game, the fear-based approach to leadership is not probably the one that we need right now.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And what I think I hear you saying too, it's about taking a look at what happened, but then also looking ahead, looking future focused, not pointing backwards. And I think that there's a real difference there, because I know a lot of leaders will look back and they want to stay there. And that's not what you're talking about. You're saying take what we experienced, and then let's learn from it so that we don't do it next time. And I think the next time is the real beauty of what you're talking about in the debrief.
Yeah. Okay. So you hit on something really fundamental. Let's talk about most forms of accountability.
Yeah.
And I think most forms of accountability are backwards looking and blame oriented. Like for the agile practitioners, those who are familiar with
Yes.
Scrum, for example, use retrospectives. A retrospective, by definition, is backwards looking.
Yeah.
You read the book Good to Great, Collins, great
Yeah.
job there. Talks about postmortems. What does a postmortem suggest that has happened? Death.
Somebody
What is the
died.
mindset? Something died, need to be autopsied. Not like a very positive outlook here.
Right.
Usually, a postmortem follows a failure, not a success. You can kind of
Yeah.
see where that's going. The debrief
Absolutely.
was birthed in a different environment.
Mm.
Debrief traces its origin story to World War One.
Oh, really?
Uh,
Huh.
yeah, World War One. The idea here was nobody has ever used airplanes as instruments of war, as mechanisms of death before. Nobody knows how to do it,
Mm.
and we've got to learn on the job and create a new standard while engaged in combat operations, which is a really really difficult
That's
thing to
tough.
do.
Yeah.
And so, by virtue of necessity, the debrief was birthed as a learning tool. Let's
Mm.
learn from our experiences, because tomorrow we're going to get another swing of the bat, trying to eventually create a new standard while we're learning in disruption.
Yeah.
And it was birthed in a forward focused approach out of pure necessity. It
Mm.
was such an effective means of team learning that those who were engaged in this, and on the U.S. side, the Allied Expeditionary Forces, which created the U.S. Army Air Corps, which in turn created the United States Air Force, we've never stopped doing it.
Mm.
We've literally never stopped doing it since World War One. And what
Mm.
I think we've done is we've gotten a lot better on the human side. We've recognized the imperative of making it okay for people to be vulnerable in order to promote
Mhm.
learning. We've recognized that fear is not the right way to inspire our teammates to learn
Yeah.
better. So we've become outstanding mentors, and I'd say primarily coaches in a
Mhm.
debrief setting. Less leading, more coaching, creating the bonds of trust. And the way that I would describe a high performance team like a fighter squadron is that we fail exceptionally well together, using failure as a learning mechanism to make tomorrow better than today. I mean,
Mhm.
what more could
Yeah.
you ask for? And we take it for granted, okay? We
Yeah.
take it for granted. What a great approach this is to help the
Yeah.
team.
Yeah, that is really so insightful, and I'm thank you for sharing about the history of the debrief, because I never knew that, and I guess one of the things that came to my mind as I was hearing you talk about it, there's such an old school, I'm going to call it an old school mentality, even though I'm kind of part of this generation or spectrum, this old school mentality of command and control, and wanting to tell people what to do in terms of direction and leadership. But this kind of leadership is such a different approach. How do we change the mindset of someone who's been, I'm going to say, programmed, or at least has learned their model from that era of business and business leadership?
Good. Couple of questions, or a couple of points rather. Go study some Gallup polling about like how many people are thriving in the work that they do right now.
Yeah,
Okay, and that's how effective is command and control as a
yeah,
leadership
true.
style. I mean, across the planet, you're seeing the rise of loud quitters, and loud quitters defined as taking actions to harm the organization that employs them,
Yeah,
not a healthy state of play. A number of people that
right.
say that they strongly agree that they trust their leadership, I think last time I checked was 23%. Number of people who say that they believe they're being managed in a way that helps them to do their best work, 19%. So, like, yeah,
Hmm.
maybe you could do it that way, but is it working? Probably
Right.
not. And when
Right.
folks have the option to go someplace else, they're going to exercise that option. So
They're going to do it. Yeah.
it's situational, not static, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that has been interesting to me as I've taken this approach from the fighter squadron and brought it into the world is how many people in business think that the entire military is a command and control
Yeah.
organization with like rigidity and
Yeah.
inflexibility and zero agility and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Uh, we learned centuries ago, way before it became a buzzword in business, that agility was the only way to go. And
Interesting.
and when I say we, it was the Prussian military that figured this thing out back in the mid 1800s.
Wow.
They said there are very nimble actors that are appearing on the global battlefield. State my words, not theirs, but essentially, folks are becoming much more agile. We need to learn how to become more agile than they're being right now if we're going to win in the future. And they had to
Mm.
rethink organizational design. It used to be a very
Yeah.
rigid, controlled environment until the Prussians came up with Auftragstaktik,
Mm.
poorly and loosely translated into English as mission command. And
Yeah.
it's an organizational philosophy that the armed forces of the U.S. has adopted. It says we need centralized command, we need decentralized execution, we need to empower
Mm.
our teammates to make decisions at their level to advance the common cause.
Oh,
Great
wow.
reference source, by the way, for mission command is a gentleman by the name of Donald Vandergriff.
Mm.
Retired Army major, has written extensively about mission command. Really, really great work. And so, practically speaking, the background that I come from is one that I have been delegated the responsibility and authority to make the decision in my cockpit about what to do. No need to ask
Hmm.
Mother, may I?
Yeah.
I understand what the central vision is, how we're defining success, what the major
Mm.
things need to be that we have to do, and I've been tasked to go out there and do it. And
Yeah.
it's a wonderful. I mean, breeds trust. Like when the
Sure.
leadership says we try, like here's your guidance, here's your clarity of expectations, go forth and execute. You're like, hey, that's pretty cool. I trust them, they trust me. This is a good relationship. Gets to buy-in, engagement, performance. Those are things that are largely absent today. So,
Right.
to
Right.
those who are trying to figure this thing out, I might get me some Donald Vandergriff and start digging
Uh-huh.
into mission command.
I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. Well, one of the things that you talked about, and I know in your book, is accountable leadership and how this debrief process you just really leads to that accountable leadership. And I'm kind of curious, like how do you implement this in a leadership team? I'd love to kind of hear like what's the how part of the debrief process.
Yeah. Okay. So, accountable leadership. To me, leadership and accountability are one and the same. You can't have one without the other. You can't lead
Yeah.
without accountability. You can't practice accountability without leadership.
Hmm.
And and for me, the definition that we have of what accountability is it's taking absolute ownership for the outcomes that the team achieves. And I make it a practice everywhere I go. Um, just this morning, I did a 4-hour workshop. I asked every business leader in the workshop, how many of you are satisfied by the degree of accountability practiced by your teammates? And we had one hand that tentatively went up in a packed room. And that's very, very normal. Why? A couple of reasons. One, we don't have a sufficient definition of the term.
Mm-hmm.
Two, we're used to accountability being weaponized.
Yes.
So like, the most frequently expressed way that accountability is used is I have to hold my teammate to account for a failure of performance. Hold
Mm.
to account. Hold to account suggests weaponization.
Yeah.
It suggests a one-way talk. It suggests somebody leader pointing finger at somebody not
Yeah.
leader, and saying
Yeah.
fix it,
Right. Right.
which nobody tends to like get excited about. Like I
No.
mean, the fraction of people are like, yeah, give me more, of how I'm failing around here is
Right. Right.
is, is statistically probably insignificant. I don't know, but I do know that when you look at our definition of accountability, taking absolute ownership of the outcomes that the team achieves, you can't
Mm,
help but notice it suggests more than just the fulfillment of individual responsibility. It actually comes from an ethos that says if one of us fails, we all do. And
mm.
accountability in this case goes up the chain of command. And if anybody's going to point any fingers, it's going to be me pointing the finger at myself, asking, how is it that I'm complicit in this shared outcome?
Mm. I love
Which
that
by
question.
itself is a game changer, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's total vulnerability, right? How am I complicit? And I think that to me is really what we're talking about here. It's that leader being vulnerable to be able to say, hey, how am I complicit in this? Did I not give the instructions well enough? What did how did I contribute to our failure here? Love
That's right.
that.
So here's another. This is a standard feature of the things that I do. We took a couple of breaks. I do this everywhere. I come back in after one of our breaks. We're there together for several hours, and
Yeah.
I go through the sequence. I'm like, hey, how we doing so far? Hey, great workshop. Um, let's pretend it's the end of the workshop. Could you evaluate this workshop? Sure, I could evaluate the work. Okay, guess what standard would you evaluate the workshop? And people have different things that they'll say. I'm like, good. All this is great stuff. Question for you: did you communicate your expectations to me in advance of this workshop so that I could meet your internally held expectations? And to a person to this day, the answer has been no. I'm like,
No.
okay, so how can I meet your expectations? Well, you should know. So that I should know. I should be clairvoyant enough to know what you're thinking
Yeah.
and what you're thinking and what you're thinking. You're basically telling me that you're willing to measure me against an unfair standard. Now let's flip the script. How would you feel if I did that to you? If I were to give feedback to your CEO about how you're doing today, absent a standard that we've agreed upon, one that I've not
Yeah.
communicated. Oh, that's not fair, right? Okay,
Right.
good.
Right.
So
Right.
then, so then, then how does this thing work for us? And that's, I think,
Yeah.
it's easy for us to fall into this trap to not equip our
Mm,
teammates with what it is that they need in order to be able to rise to meet the expectations, because there are none. And then we're
yeah.
unsatisfied on the backside. But who's at fault for this? It's
Mm-hmm.
us. We
Mm-hmm.
as leaders haven't equipped our teammates with the clarity of expectations necessary oftentimes, and
Yeah.
we have to own that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing. You go back to mission command. Maybe it's a risky proposition, you might think, to empower your teammates to make decisions at their level. What makes it low risk to no risk is if you've given them clear enough expectations. The Prussians did that by way of commander's intent.
Mm,
Then you've given them everything that they need in order to be able to meet and exceed what it is that we've defined as success. And so
mm.
it's actually very, very easy. It's relatively simple if it's done the right way. So
Yeah.
long-winded non-answer to your question, what does it
No,
take
that's
to
good.
get this thing going? A couple of
Yeah.
things. Understanding that absolute ownership resides at the top, creating an environment where it's safe to be vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's that called? Psychological safety,
Right.
formerly defined by Dr. Timothy Clark as an environment of rewarded vulnerability. So, if as a leadership team we can't create psychological safety, do not try to practice the tenets of debrief to win, because it's not going to work. You have to
Mm,
be vulnerable enough to take ownership, and vulnerability has to be manifested by the leadership team. So, we have to create the right
yeah.
culture. We have to know that we own it. We have to make it okay for others to own it as well. And
Mm,
then we can get into the process discussions that allow us to efficiently and effectively use accountability as a learning mechanism.
mm. Gosh, I love that. That's so powerful. So, how do you see this played out in the business world in actually implementing this for a team that maybe has never done anything like this before? How do they begin? And obviously, they need to go buy your book, Debrief to Win, and maybe even get in contact with you to come and bring your workshop to them. But talk a little bit about what are some of the maybe the first couple of steps that they need to be thinking about.
Yeah. Okay. Great question. This is really important. I will tell you that our company VMax Group does work with a lot of different institutions, a lot of different organizations, a lot of different businesses, to include the United States Air Force.
Oh,
In
wow.
fact, prior to this recording, a week ago, I was working 2 days on site with the United States Air Force.
Wow.
And when it comes to the Air Force, scaling the approach beyond the fighter squadron and also helping people understand why it works. There are things that I've
Mm-hmm.
learned since I left the Air Force that were really mission critical to
Mm.
understanding why it works. You got to understand why it works to make sure that it continues to work for us. So that's
Yeah.
really important to note. Why do I say that? I actually, though my heart is still with the United States Air Force and by extension the military, I much
Sure.
prefer teaching this to a business that has never experienced it before because it's such a game changer.
Mm.
And watching this thing flourish is so rewarding that I think I was actually a fighter pilot to do this. Okay, so
Mm.
just know that.
Interesting. Yeah.
I used to think that I existed to be a fighter pilot. I actually think I was a fighter pilot to be able to do this because
Wow.
folks will open their door, to the cool
Yeah.
stories, the background is interesting. But in so doing, they're opening the door to real performance. And what they're getting is teams that are starting to really gel and perform
Mm.
well beyond expectations.
That's cool.
5 things that I think it takes to be able to do this thing right. Number one, we have to figure out what our tactical missions are. Adopt a tactical mission orientation to our work, something that again
Mm.
is largely absent in the business enterprise. Lots of self-limiting beliefs like, oh, that's easy to do in the military, it's hard to do here. No, it's actually harder to do in the military, easier to do here. We just don't know it. Having a
Yeah.
tactical mission orientation does a couple of things for us. One, embedded in every tactical mission is a defined outcome
Mm.
with measurable objectives. That's necessary for accountability. Two, embedded in every tactical mission is an understanding of its purpose, meaning, and impact. That drives the desire to perform. And because there's a consequence of not achieving mission success, we're gonna plan to win. We're gonna give ourselves the best chance possible of succeeding here. So that's the first thing. Second thing, we got to build and maintain a high degree of psychological safety. Dr. Clark says environment of rewarded vulnerability, got to be able to be vulnerable without consequence in order to be able to practice absolute ownership. Third thing,
Mm-hmm.
we have to learn how to tactically plan. Businesses do not tactically plan. They plan
Mm.
strategically. We do not have a sufficient correct planning methodology. If we haven't planned correctly, we don't have the right to practice accountability.
Mm.
In fact, I'm
Talk a
going to
little
say
bit
that again.
about that. Yeah, talk about
Yeah,
yeah. Go ahead. Share it again
yeah.
because that's I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. We're in the business of like just working, 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 doing. I need to do this, I need to do this, do this. How often do we sit down and actually plan to win? How many of us
Yeah.
have a methodology that's consistent, same? Everybody does it the same way. We do it every time that we have something that warrants it, something that we would call a tactical mission. How many of us have that? In my
Mm.
little non-scientific surveys, it's very, very few. Very few people
Yeah.
that would suggest that they have something. Is it universally practiced? Typically not. Is it sufficient or correct? Mm.
Mm.
That's something that's largely absent, and that
Yeah.
does not help us. Okay?
Yeah. Right. Right.
Got to set up for accountability before we practice accountability.
Yep.
Fourth thing that needs to happen is we have to learn how to practice team accountability. Not one-to-one accountability, not accountability that says it only follows a failure, not accountability that's all about criticism. It's team accountability that's all about learning,
Mm.
which is
Mm-hmm.
the entirety of Debrief to Win. That's the whole point of the book is to
Yeah.
focus on the team accountability aspect. And the fifth piece of all of this is creating an environment where folks are empowered to make decisions at their level, giving us the additional boost of enthusiasm, buy-in, commitment en route to performance. We'll call it just the mission command element.
Yeah.
Those are the things that we need to do. And it starts with picking a few things that we might call missions, planning for them, planning for when the debrief's going to be,
Mm.
post mission completion, debriefing it, learning from that to make the next iteration go better,
Yeah.
and creating a life cycle around the mission that's
Yeah.
designed to help us to consistently learn.
I love that because to me, as I'm hearing you share this process, it's a lot of creating the rituals of a team that, and those rituals then begin to ingrain the behaviors of debriefing and accountability within them, right? I mean, it's the ritual, I think, that's the magic sauce, at least in my mind anyway.
Yeah, look, the magic sauce is having more psychological safety than most organizations on the planet, coupled with a ritual that says we're always going to learn. That
Yeah.
1-2 punch, I
Hmm.
didn't create it. I was born into it. I mean, literally, when I raised my right hand and swore an oath and joined up, and they gave me the
Yeah.
keys to an F-15, I'm like, oh, so this is how we do it around here. Okay, that's fine. Like, who am I to challenge this in any way? And then when it
Right.
worked so magnificently for me, I mean, the quality of our debriefs, and at the I hesitate to share this, but at the weapons school, I mean, we only have 5.5 months to deliver a PhD level education in tactical leadership. We'll
Wow.
debrief for like almost a day after a 1 hour mission when there was only 35 minutes worth of tactical stuff. Like I've had
Wow.
debriefs that lasted 19 hours. And
Wow.
it's exhausting, but you're going to milk
Yeah.
everything you can from it because we only
Sure.
have so much time to learn and the clock's
Right.
ticking. And so we're going
Mm.
to max perform this because we're that committed. We're so deeply committed to our purpose that we're not going to, we are, we're going to max perform every nanosecond of this
Mm.
thing.
Yeah.
And once the course ends, we start with a new batch of students, we're going to go right back and do that again. Yeah, that's
Man,
that. I mean,
that's
and you tell
yeah.
me, so often folks in business tell me, well, it's not life or death here. Oh,
Oh, I
well,
think yeah. Sometimes
you
it
tell
is,
that to
right?
the CEOs of failed businesses, but more importantly, you tell it to the teammates that are no longer working in those failed businesses that the CEO left behind. I
Yeah.
mean, like that is a form of death, right?
Yeah. Right.
And it's hyper
Right.
competitive, and the marketplace is shifting, and costs are all over the place, and people and the way that they're expected things is changing, and the customer dynamics are shifting. Like we have to constantly be learning to stay ahead of all of this in order to stay
Yeah.
solving. Look at good to
Yeah.
great. How many of those companies are still great?
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Exactly. Really good point. Yeah. Well, and I think when you start to add in all of the complexity and the uncertainty that we experience in our world, this is a way that as humans we can continue to learn and stay ahead of some of that uncertainty, or at least operate within that uncertainty. I mean, I got to believe that you, even though you had a mission, you never know what your enemy's going to do. You never know what the customer is going to do or what the supply chain is going to do. And so we have to be willing to adapt and change because of the learnings. And I think that's really where I see this process being so valuable, especially as business leaders.
100%. In fact, maybe in a future episode we can come back and talk a little bit about complexity. Okay.
I would love to. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and that to me, that's another level. It's a mind-blowing component of what it is that we're up against right now, realizing that we do not control in a complex system our outcomes. We can only control decision and action quality, and that's a really fascinating approach. And when we enter into that world, the simple approach to accountability literally doesn't work for us. And
Mm.
so how do we learn our way through that? Anyway,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
big topic. But I just want you to
Perfect.
know that like we have to be positioned to learn as fast as possible in
Hmm.
every one of our organizations in order to stay ahead of the curve as much as we can. We also have to be positioned for the future disruptions that are to come. COVID-19
Yeah.
caught the world completely by surprise. We weren't ready for it, and so many of us got crushed by it. Like in the
Yep.
business world, so many of us did not survive it.
Yeah.
Others had their best years ever and flourished in ways that they couldn't have even conceived of. And so it's
Yeah.
such an
So true.
amazing phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
But
So
here's the
true.
rub. We've got so many things going on across the planet right now. And in the United
Hmm.
States, the US presidential election year to boot. We have to be anticipating disruptions and we've got to be in a learning posture. And
Yes.
if disruption catches us by surprise now, that's on us.
That's our fault. Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
our
Yeah.
fault.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Second time is our fault. And so
Yeah.
I would ask everybody that's listening to this conversation, that's been learning from you, how equipped is your team to learn right now?
Hmm.
And if you're not satisfied with your answer, if you're honest with yourself and you're not satisfied with your answer, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. Man, you are just giving us so much value here, Cujo, and thank you for sharing this wisdom because I think so many organizations are going to benefit, and I think so many leadership teams are going to benefit as well because just understanding this process is it's transformational. It really, I think it's transformational, and I love that. Maybe one last thing I'd love to have you share with me, just maybe like your personal experience in going through the debrief process, because I know that I've heard you tell a story about being like two decisions away from victory, even though you were kind of, feeling down about the way you performed. Your commander basically helped you to reframe things. And, something that you said earlier really struck me, and I loved it because you talked about this process being a coaching process and asking good questions. And in that story that I heard you tell, your commander asked you a couple of questions that were really poignant, and it really helped you to kind of reframe the situation. I'd love for you just to share that because I think that when people hear somebody like you who is used to performing at the edge of the envelope, you are someone who is always learning yourself. And I love that. And that's the thing that I like in the growth space is really built on having people share their experiences of when they've been in that growth space, that place where, man, I've never done this before, but man, I'm going to learn really quickly. Would you mind sharing that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So going back to, what is the ambition of a debrief? So many forms of accountability stop at the, okay, you're to blame. We've gotten to a substantive root cause that says you're at fault. So fix it, and
Yeah. Yeah.
done, right? And you're like,
Right.
does that work? The
Yeah.
outcome of a debrief is that we as a team are confident that tomorrow is going to be better than today. The outcome of a debrief is if we won, we're going to figure out why we won so that tomorrow we're going to win again because of us, not because we're lucky. And if we lost today, the outcome of the debrief is we're going to figure out why we lost so that we equip ourselves with the confidence that we're probably never going to lose this way again. Can't control all the variables. It could happen, so we're never going to say never, but we're pretty confident we're not going to win. We're not going to lose this way again tomorrow.
Right.
Okay, and then how do you get to be a decent fighter pilot? You have to fail a lot, and so I think back to my early days as an F-15 pilot, and I was not that good. In fact, I almost washed out of the F-15 school for crying out loud.
Oh my gosh.
I came this close to not flying F-15s for the rest of my life.
Oh my goodness.
I was on double secret probation. I had to be counseled by all these people. I had all these special grade sheets, and my name tag had a different color to highlight me as like a highly deficient F-15 pilot. And
Oh no.
so the fact that we'd be talking about a successful flying career is stunning in
Yeah.
retrospect. Like there's a time when I never thought that this would ever happen.
That's great.
How did a scrawny little guy that played the violin and piano become decent at flying F-15s and F-22s? Simply
Mm.
put, after every mission, we'd go to learn. And in those learning sessions, I wasn't told that I was horrible. I wasn't told about you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong. It was a little bit different. It was a fact-based approach to learning. All the facts were in front of us. You could not refute the facts. We used video footage of how we were using our radars and what the heads-up
Mm.
display was showing and what weapons were being used here and there. We were listening to the audio, couldn't deny what was on the tapes. It was all there. And in this fact-based analysis, our coaches slash flight leads would sit there and go, all right, here's what I'm saying. You made this decision the right way. You made this decision the right way. You made this decision the right way. Now, ultimately, we did not achieve mission success today. But what we've done is we've done a root cause analysis that identifies this one decision right here. Had it been made differently, could have led to a completely different outcome. And my coach would sit, we'll call him a flight lead, a
Yeah.
major
Yeah.
lieutenant colonel that was extremely proficient in what they were doing. Coach would be like, hey, any doubt in your mind about your ability to make a better decision tomorrow? You're like, well, when you put it that way, no, there's no doubt in my mind. Hey, you know what, Gooch? I have a 100% confidence in your ability to make a better decision tomorrow. Why don't you go make a better decision? You're doing so much right. One decision from victory today. Let's rock this thing.
Yeah.
And when it's framed that way, you can't help but be itching to want to
Oh,
go back out there and try, right? When it's
get me
framed the
back in the
opposite way, you are,
cockpit, right?
that's right. You
Yeah,
want to get right back out there right now and prove that you've
yeah,
got this. The other
yeah,
way, I mean, you're already beating yourself up mentally. You know that you failed
yeah.
the team, right? You
Sure.
know in your heart of hearts that it's your fault. But when somebody tells you that they also know that you
Yeah,
suck,
yeah.
I mean, like, okay, that may not be the way to inspire all of our teammates all the time.
Right.
There's a time and
Yeah.
place for that. There's a time and a place, situational leadership for
Hmm.
different styles. But I'd say on the macro, I benefited constantly from having leaders who I felt cared about me, would
Mm.
help pick me back up, build me back up, tell me that
Hmm.
they were confident in my abilities, and I responded well to that.
Yeah.
And here we
Yeah.
are now. Flying career is done, but it was a really, really good one, courtesy of outstanding
Mm.
coaches and mentors that built
Yeah.
me into who I became.
Wow. That is so good. So, one last question. I promise I won't play Columbo and I have one more question. But one came up to mind because I work with a lot of emerging leaders and I'm curious. How would you tell an emerging leader, someone who's maybe a first time people leader or someone who's a high potential and they're kind of learning their own leadership, how would you have them implement this in their world? And I don't care where you take that, but I'm thinking of that emerging leader who oftentimes is kind of still just finding their way. And to me, this is a beautiful way for them to learn a skill that they can use as they continue to learn and grow in their own leadership.
Yeah, good. Um, so there's a distinction between feedback and a debrief. There's actually a lot of things that people think are debriefs that aren't. In fact, most of
Okay.
the time when I go talk to people, like, well, we do debriefs. Like we have a Monday meeting. That's kind of a debrief. I'm like, no, that's not a
Right.
debrief. Debrief has very specific components to it.
Yeah.
For sure, every debrief has a root cause analysis built into it, leading to a what are we going to do next time that we're going to hold ourselves accountable for doing next time. Do you want to use that terminology? Like we're going to change behaviors for next
Yeah.
time to make tomorrow better than today. There's a discipline here, and you cannot just call anything that you want to a debrief. It's not.
Okay. Yeah.
Feedback is not a debrief, but if I'm an emerging leader, one of the things that I want is a lot of feedback on how it is that I'm leading. I have a suspicion about how it is that I'm doing. I might think that I'm a
Right.
vulnerable person who's taking ownership and practicing
Yeah.
great accountability, but I don't know what other people are thinking about me, and I'd want to collect some feedback. Consistently. I also want to do some personal debriefs, setting expectations of how it is that I'm defining success,
Mm.
measuring based upon the feedback, am I achieving it? And staying in that cycle as often as possible to learn my way into a better position. I'd also probably want to get some coaching on helping me to do all of these things because left to
Hmm.
my own devices, I may not be as
Right.
effective as if somebody who knows what they're doing is guiding me in the right direction. And then I'd never stop doing it. 35 years later, as the CEO of Corporation Y, a multi-trillion dollar enterprise, I would still be doing the exact same things. Why? Leadership is situational, not static. And we've
Mm.
always got to be learning how to do it better until the day that we give up our breath the last time. An
Yeah.
accelerant to all of this, if I'm an emerging leader, I might watch 12 O'Clock High, starring Gregory Peck, 1950s black and white movie about bomber
Okay.
command in World War II. Start there, okay?
Okay. I love that. I love that. That's great. Now I'm going to go back and find that. I'm going to watch it.
It's a great one. It's a great one. If you're not moved to tears, you have no soul, okay?
I love it. I love it. Oh my goodness. I cannot thank you enough, Cujo, to just say thank you for not only for being here and the generosity of your time, your wisdom and knowledge, but also thank you for your service too. I didn't say that at the outset, but I really deeply appreciate it. My son was in the Marine Corps, and I have an incredible affinity as a father of someone who's been in the military. The appreciation I have for everything that you've done and given up for the country. I'm deeply appreciative. So thank you.
Thank you, David. I tip my hat to my family that were even better in terms of service. They didn't get a vote on anything. They had to
Yeah.
say goodbye and hope that I came home.
Right.
I give credit to the families above the service personnel, I think for sure. I'll also tip my cap to your son, and great job, Dad, on bringing a U.S. Marine into the world, who's
Oh,
always
thank
a
you.
Marine, by the way, Semper
Yeah, it's
Fi.
true. That's true. That's true. Yeah, I never forget that for sure.
Hmm.
Well, thank you again, Cujo. Let me. I did forget to ask. So, how can people get in touch with you? How do they find out more about some of the things that you're doing, your book, all of those kinds of things? I'd love to be able to
Yeah.
get people in touch with you.
No, great. I appreciate that. At the time that this podcast recording comes out, we're minutes away, maybe days from two new websites. Top Gun Teamwork is one of them.
Love it.
VMax LLC is the other one. We help organizations implement what it is that we teach and debrief to win, and it's so fulfilling. So if this is something that you're interested in, want to up the accountability game,
Mm.
our implementation program is second to none.
I love that. Thank you. We'll make sure that all of those websites and information are in the show notes. So whatever you're doing right now, if you're walking, if you're working out, if you're driving, don't worry. Just go to the show notes, and we'll make sure that they're there. Cujo, thank you so much. I appreciate everything that you've done here and shared all of your wisdom. So thank you.
Hey, thanks for what you're doing in the world. I appreciate that. Okay, it's great work. We need more of
Appreciate
it.
that. Thank you. Thank you.